Greetings, my name is Kerry and welcome back to my channel. Today I have a new 5 faves video for you. So it's been a little while since I've made one of these, and this is not actually quite a bookish one, although it will vaguely refer to books at some point. But this is just something that has really been helping me deal with lockdown and improve my mental health. So it is 5 favourite podcasts that I have been listening to recently. I wanted to share this with you because I've been listening to podcasts for a little while now. Well, for a couple of months really, and it started when I went back to work after I'd been ill. So I was off for just over a month with PTSD and anxiety. When I went back to work, I really started to value having my lunch breaks in the middle of the day, but found that I needed to get away. So I decided I would go for a walk on my lunch break, but I wanted to be able to switch off from work entirely. So I started listening to podcasts while on that walk to give me that opportunity to give my brain something else to concentrate on so that I could have a mental break from what I was working on. And that has been a really valuable thing that I've carried on into working from home. Working from home has been an adjustment for me, particularly with the type of job I'm used to doing. My job it is as a youth worker. I'm used to working around people all the time. When I return to work, it was initially working in the office, and I was just starting to go back out to work with young people when we entered into the lockdown. So we're all doing very different jobs from what we're used to doing. So I found just sticking to that routine of going for a walk at lunchtime and listening to a podcast while I'm walking has really helped me to manage my anxiety, coping with difficult situation that we're all in at the moment. This is a real mix of things that I'm going to bring to you today to talk about. I'm going to leave a couple of honourable mentions in the comments, ones that didn't quite meet the grade, because I only want to talk about 5. 2 of them is because they are quite specifically Christian, and I know that for a lot of my audience that won't be relevant, but I found them really helpful. So that is the Bible Project and Rebuilders. And then 2 that are comedy ones that I didn't want to overwhelm you with comedy ones, but they are ones that I really enjoy, which is The Guilty Feminist, which is presented by Deborah Francis White and Sophie Hagen, which is about feminism and it's really funny. And then the other one is Off Menu by Ed Gamble and James Acaster, which is where they bring in a guest to talk about some of their favourite meals. So those are my 4 honourable mentions that all of the podcasts I talk about, I'm going to put all of their links in the description box for you. They will be to the Apple Podcast app because that's the one that I use. I think you should be able to get them all on other podcast providers as well. A couple of them are BBC podcasts anyway, so you'll find them on the BBC Sounds app. But just for my own ease, I'm just going to link to the Apple Podcast app links for them. So without further ado, I'm going to go into my 5 favourites. These are going to be in no particular order. Let's say they're not in order of favourites, they're just in what feels like a sensible order. So I'm going to start with the sort of more maybe health focused ones and then move into the more comedic ones. So the first one I'm going to talk about is actually the first podcast I started listening to. It was one that was recommended by my therapist. So my work provided some solution-based therapy for me to help me get back to work really, and it was really, really helpful. My therapist recommended this podcast, which is Feel Better, Live More by Dr. Rangan Chatterjee. He is a GP but has also done some TV stuff. His ethos is that he looks at the bigger picture, so doesn't always just prescribe medicine. He tries to find if there are lifestyle changes his patients can make that will improve their well-being, and he sees things as very holistic. Each episode of the podcast focuses on a different aspect of health. He brings in different guests who are experts in different things, talks to them about their field, what they're interested in, how it can help improve people's health. But his goal is very much to try and simplify being healthy, make it easier for people in their everyday lives to make healthy choices. And that is something I found really valuable, particularly also seeing the link between mental and physical health. So if you are keeping your body healthy, if you are eating better and sleeping better and exercising more, then that tends to have a knock-on effect and improve your mental health. And that is something that was a really important lesson for me to be thinking about when I was trying to recover from mental illness. Lots of really great takeaways in that podcast. I think I've listened to about maybe 20 episodes now. There are well over 100, so I've got a long way to go to catch up, but I'm really enjoying them. He's also done a couple of coronavirus related specials, just sort of giving advice on how to manage the situation, again talking to experts that are sort of understanding, particularly about mental health at this time. So really highly recommend go and check out his podcast. He's also written a couple of books, so I read one of them, The 4-Pillar Plan, and found it really, again, really interesting, really helpful. Would like to try and get my hands on some more of his books, hopefully when the libraries reopen. But if you're interested in trying to improve your mental or physical health, really highly recommend that podcast. The next one I'm going to talk about is Unlocking Us with Brené Brown. Brené Brown is an American researcher. She is an expert in shame and vulnerability. I first came across her a couple of years ago when she did a couple of TED Talks about shame and vulnerability, and then when I was browsing for more podcasts to listen to, I found hers. It's a brand new podcast. She's only been going for about a month on it. She was all set to launch when coronavirus hit, so the first episode is all about dealing with new and uncomfortable situations, which she made especially for the current climate. I've only listened to a couple of the episodes so far, so I've listened to that one and one other one, but I've just found them so insightful. From the second episode, she brings in guests to talk about different topics. So the second episode is with a lady who was a key figure in the really early days of the Me Too movement, so years before it gained worldwide visibility. She was working day in, day out with young black women in her community that were survivors of sexual assault and helping them come to terms with that. In that episode, her name's Tarana Burke, and she and Brené talk a lot about connection and empathy and compassion, and it was just such a fulfilling conversation. That's what I've really enjoyed about it. I've recently read one of Brené Brown's books as well, and it's just really uplifting because it helps you to understand some of the reasons why you're making the decisions you're making and where that comes from, and is that coming from a place of shame and trying to protect yourself, or actually is it about being vulnerable and being courageous and making connections. So I found that a really encouraging podcast as well. Now, the bookish podcast I'm going to talk about is one that I'm really enjoying right now because it is about books and it's about travel. So travelling is something that I really love to do, and obviously at the moment we're not able to do it. So if you are missing out on planning trips, or maybe you've actually had to cancel holidays, this is a lovely podcast that helps you experience travel without leaving your house. So it's called Strong Sense of Place, and in each episode the hosts, whose names I've forgotten, they each talk about a couple of books linked to the place that they're talking about and that are really evocative of the place and the themes that they're talking about, and then most of the episodes also have an interview with something related to that place. So the first episode was about Prague, which is where they live. They're Americans but live in Prague. The second episode is about restaurants, and the third episode, which I've just listened to this weekend, is about Japan. I think there are about 11 or 12 episodes so far. In each episode they recommend usually 5 books, although they occasionally talk about other ones as well. So this podcast will be dangerous to your TBR. I've listened to 3 episodes so far and I've added 10 books to my books to find list because I just really am excited by the books that they're recommending. As I say, it feels like you are visiting the place without actually being able to go there. The video cut out because I ran out of storage, so hopefully I've got the angle more or less the same, and I can't really remember what I was talking about, but I know I was talking about the Strong Sense of Place podcast. It is a really great podcast, really evocative of the places they're talking about, really great recommendations for books to read to help you feel like you're inhabiting that space. If you're like me, if you love books and you love travel, a great way to be able to experience other countries and cultures at the moment when we're not able to travel there. So highly recommend that one, and shout out to Lou from Lulu Reads, who is a book blogger that I follow on Twitter. So she actually recommended this podcast a couple of weeks ago and I saw her tweet about it and thought actually that sounds like the sort of thing I'd really enjoy. So I know she sometimes watches, so thanks so much. Really enjoying this recommendation from you. So the final 2 podcasts that I'm going to talk about are both kind of quite comedy ones, but also make you think as well, which is why they won out over the other comedy podcasts that I mentioned in my honourable mentions. The first one of them is called Evil Genius and it's hosted by Russell Kane. So every week he and 3 of his comedy friends discuss a famous figure from history and whether that person was actually as good as we think they are or as bad as we think they are, and sort of really looks into some of the nuances of their characters and reveals a lot about them that make you really question, were they as good as you thought they were? Some of the people that have been considered include Roald Dahl, Gandhi, John Lennon, Evelyn Waugh, Albert Einstein, and I mean there's loads of episodes, I've still got loads to go, but I really love it because what we tend to forget when we hero worship famous people is that they are human, they are flawed, they are nuanced characters, and if we really fangirl about, or fanboy, about certain people, we tend to put them up on a pedestal and only explore the good parts of the character and tend to brush a lot of stuff under the carpet. And actually, a lot of the people that we elevate to this position aren't necessarily deserving of that, and then when you find out negative things about people's characters, it makes you question a lot of things. So that's what I really like about this podcast, is it goes to those places and it says, actually, are these people that you think were brilliant as good as you think they were? It really does challenge your preconceptions, which is something that I really like and appreciate. They haven't talked about anyone that I really am precious about yet, which is a bit worrying. I don't know how I'm going to react when they talk about people that I actually kind of really care about. I mean, the Roald Dahl episode was not the most fun one to listen to because his books were a big part of my childhood and he wasn't as nice a person as you imagine him to be. Really keen to see how I react when they talk about people that I care about even more than that. But the conversations are always carried out with a lot of grace and a lot of humour. The people he's talking with, the people who are having this conversation with him, often have very different opinions. So it's really interesting, at the end of every episode they are told they have to pick. There's no grey areas. Did they think this person was more evil or more genius? And it's really interesting to hear how they come to those decisions. Really enjoying listening to it and learning more about some famous people from history that I didn't know very much about. Really making me think as well about the nuances in people's character and how do we define who we celebrate, really, which, yeah, I think is really good questions to ask ourselves about famous people, particularly because they are flawed and we shouldn't be putting people on pedestals. And then similarly, the final podcast I'm going to talk about is another one that looks at history but in a fun way. So it is called You're Dead to Me, and it's hosted by Greg Jenner, who is one of the writers from the Horrible Histories TV series, and every episode he looks at a different period of history or character figure from history that we maybe don't know that much about, or maybe what we think we know about them is actually not accurate, and really delves into that. So he's always assisted by a historian who is an expert in the subject and a comedian who brings a bit of fun and humour to the subject. This was actually the second podcast that I started listening to when I was doing my walks, because I was enjoying the health focused one but I was finding it a little bit too heavy to listen to every day, so I was looking for some light relief, and I follow Greg Jenner on Twitter and saw him talking about this podcast on there and just really enjoyed it from the moment I started listening to it. So much information. I really enjoyed history in school but can never remember any of the dates or any of the important stuff, and also we always tended to focus on the Tudors and the First and Second World War. Those were the main periods we covered in history: the Victorians, the Romans, the Tudors and the First and Second World War. So this is really interesting for me to learn a lot about other periods of history, other characters from history, people from history that I didn't know that much about. The most recent episode I listened to was about the Aztecs, which I didn't really know anything apart from what they've covered on Horrible Histories, which is a show that I really enjoy. So if you are interested in history and want to know more about it, this is a really fun and engaging podcast. So those were my 5 favourite podcasts that I listen to when I go out for my daily walks, just to give me a bit of light relief from the stuff that I'm working on. There are those others that were honourable mentions as well, so I'm going to put all the information, all the links for them down in the description box for you to go and check those out. So let me know what podcasts you listen to. Do you listen to any of these? What do you think of them? If you've got any other recommendations of podcasts you think I'll like based on what I've said today, please do let me know as well, because I'm always trying to expand my library, although now it makes it really difficult before I go on my walk every day and I have to try and decide what podcast I want to listen to next. It's really hard to choose from, because as well as those ones, there are a couple of others that I haven't mentioned that I also really do enjoy, and it's just trying to choose what am I in the mood for today. So really enjoying exploring, learning more about the world and about history, and just having some laughs as well. It's some really enjoyable podcasts. So yeah, so let me know any recommendations, what you enjoy listening to if you listen to podcasts. So have a chat to me down in the comments. Please also like this video if you liked it, and please subscribe if you haven't already. And you can also follow me on my social media. I'm on Goodreads and I'm on Twitter and now on Instagram as well. All that information is also going to be in the description box below for you. But that's it for today, so thank you so much for watching and I will talk to you again soon. Bye!